Let's assume for a minute that we're doing face-to-face classes. And let's assume for a minute that you're taking this argumentation and debate class at the Vacaville Center. Let's also assume that it's the beginning of the zombie apocalypse. So you're in class, probably on the second level with me, and all of a sudden you hear all kinds of growling sounds from outside, okay? And as you look out the windows, you see hordes and hordes and hordes of zombies approaching the building. So the question would be, what do you do? Well, you could run out and try to outrun them, but we know that zombies run pretty fast. So you're most likely to stay inside and sort of fortify the building, right? That would make sense. There's a lot of supplies inside. You can find a lot of heavy equipment. You can board up the windows. You can board up the doors and stay safe until help arrives. Hopefully you get on top of the roof. But the one thing you probably wouldn't do is run outside the building, because the reality is the building itself is the safe place. So this analogy that I'm using of the zombie apocalypse is very similar to an analogy that Archbishop Richard Whately used in the 1800s when he talked about a concept that's very important in debate. And that is, he talked about war. And what he was trying to say is that all wars are fought over a piece of land. You know, there's someone who occupies it and there's someone who wants to take over it. Okay, so all wars are fought over literally a piece of land. It's very similar with debate, but it's more of a literal, not a literal comparison, but it's a figurative comparison, that debates are also fought over pieces of land, and those land pieces are what are called issues. So this brings me up to the concept that is really important with regard to judging a debate, and it might be a way to influence a judge's vote, is a term called presumption. And presumption simply means the way to vote in a debate. So the question that I would ask you then is, at the beginning of a war, so if we go back to war for a minute, which side occupies the ground at the beginning of a war? I'm going to wait for an answer. You can say it out loud. The side that occupies the ground is probably the side that has control over the land. So, for example, if we tried to invade Canada, which we would never do, Canada would occupy the ground. It's their land, and we're trying to invade it. Okay. Alternately, if Canada decided to invade us, even much more unlikely, we would have presumption. We would occupy the ground. We would occupy our own country until another country overtakes us. Okay. So the side that has control over the land has presumption. In other words, they have control, or they own the ground that they're standing on. Okay, this brings me up to then the idea of a debate. So the question I'm going to ask you is, at the beginning of a debate, which side occupies the ground? Waiting for a minute for you to think about this. It's either the affirmative or the negative, wouldn't be the judge, right? So you have a 50-50 chance of getting it right. It's either the affirmative or the negative. If you guess the negative, you would be right, because the negative represents the status quo. So again, the affirmative is trying to prove something new and prove that they own that right to that land or to those arguments. And the negative is saying, nuh-uh, this is the way it's always been. We're going to keep doing it this way. So at the beginning of a debate, the side that occupies the ground is the negative. That would be a quiz question right there. There are basically three types of presumption I want to cover today, and then we'll come down to the end of the debate. So the first type of presumption is what's called artificial presumption. And artificial presumption means that there are rules or policies in place. In other words, if someone said, can you show me where this is the law, and someone can like flip through it in a book or look it up on a website, that would be artificial presumption. In other words, there's something that tells us we have to do it this way because there's a rule or a law or a policy in place, actually written down somewhere. The second kind of presumption is what's called natural presumption. And natural presumption refers to the general feeling or opinion of people in a given particular area. So it could be people in the United States. It could be people in California. It could be people in Northern California. It could be people specifically in Solano County. You'll understand why I'm getting this specific here in a minute. But it really refers to what's our natural feeling before we even start talking about that subject. Are we inclined to feel this is sort of the norm and the status quo, or are we going to say that the other side is the norm or the status quo? And if I sort of feel that way, it's like, well, we've always done it that way. If you've ever heard a family member, when it comes to Thanksgiving and Christmas, say, well, we've always cooked ham on Easter. We've always cooked turkey on Thanksgiving. That would be natural presumption, because there's nothing in any kind of rule book that says families have to have ham on Easter and have to have, turkey on Thanksgiving or any other food for a specific holiday. You then have a third type of presumption, which is kind of the most odd, but we've heard this term used recently when the president has referred to an existential crisis. So existential presumption means a couple of things in my mind. The first is it says we're not quite sure what it is, but we're just going to call it one way or another. So it might be that there's policies and procedures written down, which would be artificial. It might be that we kind of feel that way anyway, and so it would be natural. It also means we're not quite sure, but we know that it doesn't exactly belong in one of the other categories. So the term existential crisis, as I believe it's defined in my mind, is that there's a problem, but we're not quite sure the totality of the causes of the problem or the totality of the effects of the problem. So it's just there's a problem there and we can kind of sense that it's going to be a problem. Okay, so those are the three types of presumption. Now let's do a quick exercise. So I want you to tell me which behavior has presumption, and you can say these out loud. You'll either be right or wrong. You have a 33 1/3% chance of getting it right on this one. So we'll start with this first behavior. So we have wearing your seatbelt and not wearing your seatbelt. Now, which side has presumption? Wearing your seatbelt, right? So the one that's in gold right now has presumption. Next question then is, what kind of presumption is this? So you have artificial, natural, or existential from which to choose. Say it louder. Some of you got it right. It's artificial presumption because there are laws in the books in California that state you have to be wearing your seatbelt. And if a law enforcement official pulls you over and you're not wearing a seatbelt, you can get fined for it. You can get cited and fined for it. So that would be artificial presumption. So the natural course is to assume that you should be wearing a seatbelt, okay? Because of the rules that are in place. Of course, there's other things that kick in too, but it's essentially artificial because we have a law and a procedure there. By the way, you probably figured out that was a crash test dummy. I obviously wouldn't put anything graphic on a slide. All right, moving on to the second example. So again, which behavior has presumption? We have going to class. Remember those days? Way back in the day. And skipping class. So which side has presumption? You have a 50-50 chance of getting it right. If you answered going to class, you were right, and you're also a very good student. That has presumption. You don't skip class until you get to a point where you say, you know what, I just can't do this anymore. I think I'm going to go away for a day. Now, then the next question is, what kind of presumption is this? Again, you have a 33 1/3% chance of getting it right. Waiting. This one would probably be, the answer would be, I would say, artificial and or natural. So this would be a discussion in class where it isn't exactly black and white. There are certainly codes of conduct for students, and there is certainly a student handbook, which probably says, and I haven't looked at the student handbook recently, I probably should, that says, you know, you should be attending class. If the class, you know, has attendance, you should be attending class. So that would probably be an artificial moment there, that a good student would go to class and also get all their homework done. But it's also, I think, natural presumption, because we would assume that if, you know, you're trying to be a good student, of course, this is the assumption here that you're trying to be a good student, that you would go to class, all right? And skipping class would be the opposite of that. But we can call it artificial and or natural, and you would tell me why you felt that way. Moving into the next example, we have, so you have your choice. So you have the behavior of being faithful to your significant other. Let's call it a boyfriend, girlfriend, partner, not necessarily a spouse, okay? You have the other behavior, which is cheating on your significant other. I shouldn't be such a dire tone here, but I'm going to do that. Cheating on your significant other or your partner. So the question would be, which of these has presumption? In other words, which one occupies the ground? Which one do we assume is the status quo until given sufficient reason otherwise? I'll let you wait on this. Let your conscience be your guide. The answer would be highlighted in gold. What has presumption is being faithful to your significant other. Now, if you're talking back at me saying, but my partner and I have agreed that we were going to see other people, then you're not cheating. By definition, that's not cheating. That's an ethical non-monogamy or an open relationship. So that would not be then considered cheating, but being faithful to them, you know, until something, then when something happens, then all of a sudden it's a huge issue usually for couples. Then we come to the next question. What kind of presumption is this? So think again here. Are there policies and procedures in place anywhere? That's why I didn't say marriage. Anywhere that says you cannot cheat on your partner or your boyfriend or girlfriend? So what do you think it is? It's natural, okay? If I threw in spouse in there, you could probably say natural or artificial, because then you've got, the commandments, or you've got another religious doctrine that you're sort of following. But this would be considered natural presumption. Most people would probably say, not a good idea to cheat on your significant other or your boyfriend or girlfriend or your partner, just not a good thing. And most people would say that's a deal breaker on the receiving end. All right, moving on to the last one here. So which behavior again has presumption? You can kind of see we're again looking at which side occupies the ground before we even start talking about this issue. So we have wearing a mask. Oh, not that kind of mask, that kind of mask. And not wearing a mask. This one's tough. If you answered, so what kind of presumption is this? If you answered, so it's either artificial, natural, or existential. What? How can that possibly be? It can be because there are certain mask mandates in certain counties, but not all the counties. It might be natural presumption because we sort of, do this because we know it to be right and because we've done it, even though there's no law in place perhaps. In our county, I don't think we have as strong of a mask mandate as Yolo County. And existential because, just in general, whether there's rules or not, we kind of understand that this is going to be the most significant thing. So if all things are equal, if we look now at a debate and we look at issues that we discuss, who do I vote for at the end of the debate? So again, we know that negative has presumption at the beginning of a debate, but if all things are equal by the end, who do I vote for at the end of the debate? What do you think? If you answered the affirmative, you're wrong. It would again be the negative for two different reasons here. The first reason is that the affirmative side has not met their prima facie burden, which is to prove what they need to prove with as much time as they have, but also because the negative side still represents the status quo. So it creates a fairly large burden for the affirmative to try to overcome that presumption. But that's the burden of the affirmative, is to prove overwhelmingly that their side is the correct side. In other words, that they should be invading that other side's ground and everybody should now agree with them. So in class, what we'll do, now that you will have viewed this, is we're going to look at some of the challenges and the benefits of presumption. It creates kind of a problem with some debates in terms of ways of decision making, and there are also some benefits to it. So those are the things we're going to talk about a little bit later in class.